I'd now like to welcome our next panel, which will discuss the proposed steps needed to scale inclusive healthcare investments in Asia. This conversation will be led by Patrick Branch, partner in L.E.K Consulting's Global Life Sciences practice. Mr. Branch has been with L.E.K for the last 15 years and advises clients in the healthcare industry on a range of topics from growth to market access. Mr. Branch, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks for that, Austin. So welcome to our panel discussion titled Voices from the Rest of the World, Journey to Scaling Inclusive Healthcare Investments in Asia. And the idea with this session here is to get the views of investors who are outside the region on how they think about Asia, kind of in the context of other geographies that they look at, and what they see as the potential for investment in inclusive healthcare. So just a quick couple of words about myself. So I'll obviously be moderating the session and hopefully keep us to time, and also kind of walk through an orderly and informative agenda. I work with L.E.K. I've been with L.E.K for 15 or so years, much of that time in Tokyo, some time in the US. I'm from the UK originally. We do a lot of work globally, but in APAC as well, helping both corporates and investors think about their strategy and their investments in the region. So I'm going to be joined by I think 3 folks have made it. So we have, and hopefully I'll pronounce your names correctly, and if I get them wrong, please forgive me. So we have Cheryl Mejia from Steward Asset Management, Mark Coffey of Global Partnerships, and Bert van der Vaart of SEAF. So what I will begin with is maybe just opening the floor to each of our panelists for them to tell us a bit about their organization, their role, their involvement in inclusive healthcare, and what they've been up to, if anything, in regards to investments in healthcare in Asia. So what types of investments, what parts of Asia, and so on. And maybe I'll begin with Cheryl, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and how your experience relates to the topic of today.
Thank you, Patrick. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you. Good morning or good evening in Asia. Cheryl Mejia, I am the managing partner of Steward Asset Management. We are known for being an inclusive capital shop, although we don't always use that mission lens in our discussion. We are primarily, from our New York base, we are focused on middle market, private equity capital. We are strategic partners to newly forming private equity firms, and an enormous part of our lens and our role is in the healthcare universe, whether it's a direct healthcare a partnership, or it's actually technology or industrial. And we can get into those different sector opportunities and how they're really expanding the precision and knowledge and access to care. I was most recently, before this role, was at the New York Common Retirement Fund, working with smaller middle market firms and in the private equity markets there. And so had an opportunity to found Steward a few years ago with partners in the industry. And it's been, our touch in Asia is taking US local champions to an international scale. That is where our growth capital is very much focused. And we look forward to exploring partnerships in the region to really expand those market penetration opportunities.
Thanks for that, Cheryl. And maybe I'll go to Bert next. If you could give a quick intro to yourself and your organization.
Great. Good evening and good morning as well from Washington, D.C. Very much appreciate the organizers' consideration for those of us out here in the United States so that we could bridge all the time spans. I was a co-founder of SEAF, the Small Enterprise Assistance Funds, in 1989, so we've been at it for more than 33 years. We invest in small, medium enterprises, primarily in the emerging markets, primarily equity, although we do some debt funds. I think I'm here because I've done a lot of things over those 33 years, and I can certainly talk about healthcare. Patrick, just for your your knowledge, I knew and worked with Jim Lawrence and Richard
Oh.
Evans and Robert Koch when they were at Bain, so a long time ago. But
Yep, yep.
I think what we are certainly seeing, we've invested in hospitals, in pharmaceutical distribution, in packaging, in specialized clinics, and in generic pharmaceutical productions as well. So I think the interesting thing here is scale, and how do we scale elsewhere? In Asia, we've been involved in Sichuan, we've been involved in Vietnam, currently really only involved in Bangladesh, also involved in India. And I think what we have seen is hospitals. We've seen localized distribution companies going well, but the topic of scale is very interesting, and I hope we get into it with the other participants during this brief panel discussion.
Great, thanks for that, Bert. And finally, Mark, if you could give us a quick overview there.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So Global Partnerships is an impact-first investor with a mission to provide opportunity for people living in poverty. We have managed 8 debt funds over the years and 1 early stage equity fund, but basically 97% of what we do is from a assets under management standpoint is debt. And we think about impact as an impact-first investor. We think about impact in terms of 4 dimensions. First, broader opportunity. So we want to support sustainable solutions across all facets of poverty, livelihoods, healthcare, clean water, housing, education, energy, etc. So when we think about, we don't have a sector approach, unlike most investors, because we have a household approach. So basically we look at the household, look at what they're, what's creating poverty there. Many times in a household living in poverty, it's many things that are contributing to that poverty. And then we find sustainable organizations that are meeting that need and provide relatively low-cost capital to those organizations. So that's broader opportunity. Deeper inclusion is the second facet of how we think about impact. And basically, we're looking for to serve poor and marginalized people. We define that traditionally. I mean, there's many definitions, but when it gets down to measurement, we think about, depending on the country, people living under 320 per day or 550 per day. And we do a lot of measurement around that so that we know that we hear a lot of organizations say we're serving the poor, but then when you get into the data, they really have very limited outreach to people under those thresholds. And so, we do a lot of, with every investment we make, we want to make sure we're understanding how many people are served that are living under those thresholds, and how our turn of capital, how many people that it benefits. The third dimension we think about is improving lives, and a lot of ways to think about that. We've had a very significant partnership from the beginning with 60 decibels. So we do a lot of work in lean data, and really understanding from the perception of the client whether their life is improving and how it's improving and at what rate. And then the fourth dimension that we think about is serving millions. So we want to invest in scalable solutions. Scale, it means different things in different countries, depending on the density of populations, but business models that can be scalable. So that's our approach. Basically, we're working in 26 countries, but we're really agnostic on geography, and we can talk more about this when we get into Asia here. But really, we're interested in working wherever there's large populations, significant populations of people living in poverty, and wherever there are innovative organizations that are meeting those needs in a sustainable and hopefully at least at some point scalable manner. So that's a little bit about Global Partnerships. I'm the President and Chief Investment Officer, and have been working at GP for about a dozen years.
Great, thanks, Mark. I want to kind of pick up on this word scale, which has come up a couple of times already, and maybe go back to you, Bert. And why do you see, as you think about your investments in Asia and maybe more broadly, why is scale an important thing for you? What is so critical about achieving scale, particularly as you think about Asia?
Well, I mean, it's not exclusively, but it has been tremendous for both the impact, and we measure impact on a number of fronts traditionally since 2004 in terms of taxes paid and full-time employment, and then also the increase in the wages paid per employee, which reflects training and improvement of lives. What we've seen in places like China is that scale is just a tremendous way with a limited amount of equity capital, and we typically invest between $2 to $5 million. So on the small side of PE, that if you can find a way to scale, obviously with that money, that's every dollar working that much harder, both to achieve the impact as well as then to provide a reasonable return for our investors. I think the issue is, if you're looking at impact, then every dollar matters. And so what we are looking in all our investments is to some extent where that scale. Now that scale could be directly in that business. Scale can also be a multiplier. There's been various agribusiness companies that have done terrific. Typically, we have about 157 suppliers for every one of the companies we've invested in. So I think we achieve scale that way. But if you look at the advent of technology, and if you looked at particularly post-COVID, where I think the internet and people's trust on the internet, or relative trust on the internet versus going to see people physically, has shifted. And so whether we look at distance for medical diagnosis or for pharmaceutical prescriptions, or whether we look at, in fact, improving regional supply chains, there are some great opportunities, we think, that provide that greater value, greater impact per dollar. The issue with healthcare, it's not, for me, I think it's a question. I think we've seen good things in healthcare, but so much of healthcare depends upon local regulations. So much of healthcare depends upon the quality of the doctors as well as on the management of the doctors. So there's certain aspects in health investments, I think, that scale more easily than others. And there's some that I don't think scale because of these local, or the question of what your scale is. In China, they can scale quite significantly in smaller countries or between countries, a little bit less so. But to get to your question, sorry about the roundabout way, it's really all a question of making these dollars work harder in the here and now to improve the lives of people and also to provide a reasonable return for our investors.
Thanks, Bert. And I guess maybe moving to Sheryl, as you look to invest your dollars and you're looking perhaps to assess Asian funds and GPs, what are you looking for there? I mean, what would draw your attention? What would attract you to place money in the region with a particular fund, looking at particular opportunities? What's your strategy when it comes to Asia?
Yes, so there's a number of things. One, we are our genesis in New York and the US base is primarily as a service, as looking for those partnerships that can help us explore 4 areas. And the 4 areas we've identified that are really very compelling in the Asian marketplace. One is, and this is, very parallel, globally, is that there's a lack of services. And, as the 17 asset management report was so good at talking about the lack of services. And, this generation, they talk about it as a lack of beds, but ultimately, I think there'll be other measures to measure it, because now with telehealth and some of the other things, but the 3 other areas are the actual areas we're looking to invest in. So there's services that are now that models being changed by better and more efficient equipment and industrial and companies that can truly change the way that the service delivery happens. And it's interesting, the supply shortages have really affected both equipment and product delivery. We've seen some very innovative, for instance, wound care solutions and fabric solutions for specialty care that have been, just revolutionary and need, to Bert's point, that scale. But the two other very impactful areas that we think are global opportunities, regardless of geographic genesis, and that have that scalability, are both technology, which will have three main legs to the axis. One is just the population management. So keeping the patient data and their therapy journey in a central location, but so that there's could be coordination of care. But more importantly, at the cellular level, there's a much more precision data management and technology management that is going on to, for instance, better measure high-risk pregnancy possibilities. And then, at the big data level, of course, we're looking at measuring big population efficacy and efficacy of treatments and drugs across countries. And that's highly regulated and needs local partnerships to make sure we're putting our lens accurately. But the final leg, the fourth leg of our lens of where we're looking at opportunities is in the education and research and tools there. And those really come down to the research that's going on in terms of novel things like biologics, but the industrial tools that are coming up and the collaboration between scientific efforts globally are really incredibly just accelerating. And that's where you can truly improve the outcomes. So I've gone on a little bit long, but those are the four major areas we're looking at. And we think the scalability truly is in the technology and the research and education at the highest level.
Got it. And Cheryl, maybe building on that, specifically thinking about Asia, as you think about I think the four dimensions you laid out there, what is the specific Asian opportunity or the specific challenges you see about the region? Is there something about the region that makes it more interesting than other regions for you? Are there any kind of specific challenges that stand out in the region? Well, relative to other places,
40% of the growth, as Lily accurately pointed out earlier, is 40% of the healthcare spend growth is in Asia, and so that market is one of the most important markets globally for any company that's going from a local champion nexus, whether it's North America or Asia, genesis to begin with, but you really want to be in that market. Making sure you need local partners if you're not already a local partner, and so that's where we play a big role as a strategic partner to help collaborate across middle market companies. It's interesting because there's a lot of attention has been on large buyout, but we really focus on small buyout and growth equity, so companies with under $1 billion of revenue. And that's where I think the most interesting work is going on. I use the example that Zoom didn't come out of AT&T. It needed to be its own, it's had its own path. And so I think that we're really champions of the middle market and that growth equity capital, that we are part of that waterfall to help ensure both bringing capital, but also expertise and strategy to make sure a greatest global footprint for the companies we engage with.
Great. And maybe Mark, a similar question to you. You kind of said you're somewhat agnostic about the region, but I guess what is it you see about the region that's interesting, compelling, imperative that you're involved here? What are the challenges that you face as you try to do your work? And kind of how do you see that changing over time? We're talking about the present, but do you see things shifting as we think about the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, our strategy, like I said, we're agnostic, but when we do expand geography, it's sort of an edge out expansion. We started in Central America 25 years ago, and it was just sort of one country at a time, and then leaping across to Africa, and in East Africa, and then West Africa, and then Southern Africa. So, gaining expertise, especially in healthcare, where, as was mentioned, so much is about local and country regulation and policy. So it's challenging to just say, oh, we're just going to jump into Asia. It's really more about like, our research over the last couple of years, as we've been looking more at Asia, has been more about what are the organizations there that are really doing good work, that are inclusive, that have good business models that potentially could be sustainable, and where are they located? And obviously the scalability part is a lot to do with population amount and density, and we get that, but we're not necessarily, I think, like Bert said, our typical loan size might be anywhere from $1 million to 5 million or something like that, and so very similar. So we're not. We have larger because we have multiple funds. We have larger concentrations with certain partners, but we're not looking to. We're often looking to be one of the first debt organizations. So we're looking at organizations in Asia, for example. We're interested in the ecosystem development there, and we're interested in knowing, who's getting equity capital, what types of equity capital they're getting, and then how are they maturing through that process, so that they're, at the right point before the commercial banks are willing to come in. We can come in and play a pretty catalytic role in providing that, working capital to, to scale up operations. So when we think about, the countries that we're kind of most focused on are ones, first of all, where we think we can, where it's not, too difficult to actually work there, to actually invest there. Obviously, there's some countries that is very difficult to get money in and out of. So, and as a debt investor, we're typically investing on terms, 2 to 5 years. And so we have to understand, the environment in terms of, getting money out, in terms of foreign exchange, all those types of things. But yeah, the region obviously has tremendous need and tremendous potential, and we have seen that there are some very interesting organizations that have, whether it's eye care or whether it's maternal health or whatever, very interesting organizations that that are serving the type of population, at least in part, that we're looking to serve. And so we're just zeroing in on those and then saying, okay, they're located here. Can we work there? What would we need to do to work there in that particular country?
Got it. That kind of leads me to my next point, which is around, we've discussed quite a lot here about the need and the opportunity, but, it's a big region, lots of people, a great deal of diversity. It's tough to try and do everything yourself in such a place, right? I guess a question for Bert here is, what capabilities does it require to be successful in what you do in Asia? What can you do yourself or realistically do yourself? And where do partnerships come into play as you kind of do what you do here?
It's a great question, and really gets to execution, which is, we can talk about billions of people, but investment is $1 at a time, and services is one person at a time or customer at a time. So execution is critical. Certainly over our 32 years, we believe firmly in local presence. That's partly because of the SME kind of focus. You really do have to develop personal relationships with the entrepreneurs and be close to ground to really help that entrepreneur develop his or her business. I think what's advantageous, whether you can do this internally or, as you rightly suggest, whether you need to partner, because I think the thematic complexity of the various themes are so much more complicated today than they were maybe 30 years ago. You know, printing companies were the same everywhere. Packaging companies are more or less the same everywhere. That's really changing quite rapidly. So certainly, in addition to having people on the ground, it's been useful to have centralized knowledge, to have experiences from other countries, which provide kind of a reference point. But we are finding that, and of course, thanks to the internet, there is a lot of expertise that is available on a consulting basis. Whether we can find, you know, we've talked with people like Philips or various or GE that who can provide help specifically with their devices. You do get kind of bought into their product, and so you lose a little independence that way. And this is one of the complexities from health. I really salute health funds, focusing on health funds, who will presumably develop a greater sector expertise, whether in the fund manager themselves or with partners. But I think I can certainly see, I mean, we've done a lot on pharmaceutical distribution, because once we do a couple, we feel like we can do more. But, you know, and in hospitals, we've done a couple of hospitals where I think we understand the complexities of managing doctors. Doctors are very proud and specific people, and you get the heart doctor fighting with the lung doctor and all the rest for resources. So you know, I think partnering with people who are like-minded. I like what Mark is saying. Certainly, where we can look at different financial instruments once we're onto a good company. But certainly, I think having on the ground expertise, having some if possible, generalist health people on staff who can then, on a deal by deal basis, access specialists, whether by the internet or ideally people that they've known. I think those would probably very much improve the efficiency and the speed with which we could scale. That's just a beginning of an answer to a very complicated question. But I think certainly there lies in that. The other is just best demonstrated practice. If you can get a hold of what the industry standards are, it's a huge benefit to any company to say, listen, this is the conversion ratio, or this is the kind of cost or the time involved, et cetera, just as a reference point. And I know this is something that consulting companies can help on a general basis for operational improvements. But I think you're right. The field is complex enough that you need to partner it. Not everybody can do it all by themselves.
Great. Thank you for that, Bert. Unfortunately, this is only a 30-minute session, and we've already swiftly come to a close, and this feels like we're not even scratching the surface here. It would just be great to hear from each of you, like one kind of closing thought or kind of pearl of wisdom or kind of point of guidance for the audience. As you know, obviously the idea here is to encourage more inclusive investment in Asia. Any kind of final guidance for the group here? And maybe I'll begin with Cheryl and then go to Mark and then Bert last.
Right. Well, like any country, I've seen successes and you know, less stellar successes around, especially these highly regulated industries, where, you know, often when you look through, 40 to 50% of the spend, if not more, is government genesis. So having partners that have knowledge and deep knowledge into the evolving landscape, whether it's privacy or approval process of therapies, or the education and data management, and it's really important to have local partners, as Bert was saying, but also those that have an incredible regulatory and strategic planning knowledge of what's going on in the local governments, who care about the populations most, and will be either creating wonderful partnerships, but also changing, you know, being part of that conversation. So I'll turn it over.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I'm just struck by the importance of ecosystem development here. You know, that first of all, I mean, just forums like this, thanks to all those who put this together, because none of us are going to solve these problems alone. And when we think about building the ecosystem, we think about data management, we think about research, we think about early stage investors who, you know, take higher levels of risk. We think about getting more impact first investors into the system, you know, but all these partnerships are really crucial, knowledge partnerships as well as practitioners for, you know, making this happen.
Great. And Bert, the final word.
Well, thanks. I don't know how to distill the pearls. I think my predecessors have said very important issues. I mean, I think that health will continue to be a critical aspect when you've got marginal dollars. We've seen in all our countries when people have increased their income, a very large part of it goes to healthcare, and it should. And I was struck by some of the comments of the earlier participants in places like India, where people don't think about health until it's too late, kind of issue. So I do think sharing, as Mark said, is critical. The blend of local regulatory, as Sheryl says, is terrific. I just, you know, my view overarchingly with the health is it's going to remain one of the most important things that we can do on this earthly realm to improve people's lives. And as a result, I think it's where public and private partnership, where ecosystems and knowledge sharing is critical. I think where the development financial institution can play a big role as well. Don't really know how to say it anything simpler than that, but look forward to working with you all in wherever in the world we are, and thank the organizers for putting together, I think, an excellent forum in a very compact time.
Great. Well, thanks for the panel and their time. With that, we'll hand it back to 17.